Today we're going to be painting this fun abstract fruit painting. I'll be showing you the equipment I'm using, the paint colours that I've chosen along with the brands, and how we can apply the paint to our canvas in different ways to get our desired technique. This is such a fun painting to do, and you can change up the colours and the composition and the fruits to whatever you want. I've got here in front of me a 8x10 stretched canvas. This is just stretched over a board. I've also got quite a few different paintbrushes. I like to have a few different sizes and shapes on standby just so that I can pick and choose which ones I want to use throughout the painting. If you haven't got as many paintbrushes as this, do not worry, you don't need to have them all, you can just wash them in between. You'll need some kitchen towel to dab your brushes on and a glass of water. In my paint palette, I have quite a lot of white, some orange, yellow, red, blue, green and pink magenta. You can use any shades that you want for this painting. You can go wild with your colours, but I'm just going to show you the brands and the name of the paints that I'm using for this painting. So to start with, I'm going to be using the System 3 acrylic, and this is titanium white. The next brand of paint comes in our Brush and Bubbles art kit, and this is cadmium orange. Then got cadmium yellow, which is a lovely bright yellow shade. Cadmium red, again a lovely bright red shade. And then I'm using the Winsor & Newton ultramarine blue. Cadmium green. Primary magenta, which is a lovely deep pink colour. So to start with, I'm just going to pick up one of my sizes of the brushes, dipping it in the water just to loosen up those bristles. I'm just going to start by dabbing some white paint all over my canvas. I'm just going to dot it around. I'm not going to be too neat with this. I'm just splodging it on in random locations. Now, depending on what colour you want to do your background, I'm going to go for blue. So I'm just picking up some blue and dotting it on top of and next to this white. Now the reason why I'm doing this is because I'm now going to blend it onto the canvas, and I don't want the paint to be too precise. I want to have stripes in there. So I'm picking up a slightly bigger flat end brush, again just dipping it in the water to loosen those bristles up, make sure the paint's not too dry. I'm just starting to work that paint into the canvas in very choppy ways. So this is quite nice. You can experiment with your background. If you want to go a little bit more abstract, choppy, impressionist, you can do so. If you want to be a little bit more neat, you can just sweep the brush up and down or side to side, depending on the look that you want. I'm working quite quickly because I don't want the paint to dry before I'm finished blending it, but while I'm blending it, I'm just going to leave areas which might be slightly more white in tone and where they might be slightly more blue as well. And if you feel like your paintbrush is drying or the paint is drying too quickly on the canvas, just add a little bit more water to your brush and then go back in and work it into your canvas. This should help the paint go a little bit further as well. Once you're happy with that, we're just going to go ahead and I'm just washing that brush that I used originally just to dab the paint onto the canvas. I'm now going to mix up a couple of my different colours. So this is the fun bit. This is where you can experiment with the colours that you're mixing. But I'm just going to start with some white as my base, and I'm just going to mix in some of my primary magenta just to make a lighter shade of pink. And I'm just mixing this up next to that colour on my paint palette. If you want to go more pastel with your painting, you can. You just need to add a little bit more white into your paint mixture. And if you want to be a little bit bolder with your colours, just make sure you've got more of the pigment of paint in there. I'm adding in some water and mixing it in just to make sure that this paint stays nice and fresh and fluid and doesn't dry up too quickly. I'd also say just make sure you're mixing up enough of this colour. I've then just dabbed off any of the excess and I'm going to wash off my brush again before mixing up the next shade. Starting with some white again as my base, I'm just going to mix this up next to the yellow, and I'm going to add some of the yellow pigment into this white and mix it up. The nice thing about this is if you mix up a colour that you're not quite sure on, you don't have to use it. You can always mix up a new shade. I always say it's nice to experiment with your colours. And the lovely thing about this painting is you can do it a number of times using different fruits and different colours. You can have a whole series of them. So I'm just gradually adding some more of that yellow, and you can see I'm working quite quickly. I'm not trying to overthink this too much. I've still got some of my yellow paint there if I want to use it, but I've got a lighter version as well. I'm just twisting off the excess of the paint and washing off my brush again before I go ahead and mix up the next shade. So picking up some more white, I'm now just going to add some orange into this and just make a slightly lighter shade. The reason why I like to add some white paint into the mixture is the white paint helps make the paint more opaque, so less see-through, so it can act quite nicely as a base, and then if you want to add some of the brighter colours on top, these just pop more. Dabbing off the excess. Just going to pick up some more white. I've not washed off my brush because I'm now just going to add a little bit of orange and a little bit of red, and this is going to give us a slightly more coral shade. So I'm just adding the red nice and gradually, mixing it up. It'll give us quite a deep sort of corally orange colour, which I really love. So it's up to you. You can just experiment with your colours and your shades like I mentioned before. And depending on what kind of fruit you're doing, I've gone for sort of very abstract oranges with my painting. These colours work well within that theme. So I'm happy with the colours that I've mixed up now, so I'm going to give my brush a really good wash in the water. I want to make sure I've got all of that coral shade off, because I'm now going to start with my lighter shade. I'm going to start with the pink shade first as my first layer, and I'll use this shade to sketch in where I want my oranges to sit on my canvas, and then I'll fill them in as well. So with my clean brush, I'm just picking up some of this pale pink colour, and I'm just going to start sketching in a very rough sort of circle shape for my first orange. I'm doing this on the bottom right hand corner of the canvas, and I'm having the orange sort of flowing off the side as well. Now the great thing about painting fruit is we don't need to make them too neat or too symmetrical, so don't worry if your circle isn't a perfect circle. We actually don't really want it to be. Whenever you're happy with your shape, you can then go ahead and fill it in. I like to push down the bristles of the brush and fan them out, and this just helps you get a nice crisp even edge when it comes to the edges of the fruit. So you can give that an experiment if you want to as well. Whenever you're ready, you can add in your next fruit, and it's up to you how many you want to do, how big or small you want them. I'm going to be doing 3 different shapes, so I'm just going to start again just by mapping out the edge and then filling them in. I always recommend taking a little step back, and if you want to change the shape and the size slightly, this is now your moment. And if you really want to do a sort of second coat and you feel like the paint is lifting slightly, you might just need to wait for the paint to dry before adding your second coat on. And I'm just going to give my brush a nice wash in the water. Moving on to my next shade now, and I'm actually just going to mix in a little bit more of this yellow just into half of my yellow shade there, just so I have two versions. I've got a slightly darker version and a slightly lighter version. And then I'm going to start using this yellow to start painting in some very abstract shapes on top of the pink. Now I don't want to cover up all of the pink, I want to make sure that I'm still seeing certain areas of it, but I am going to be covering up parts of it with this colour just to start adding in these different layers. I would recommend letting your paint underneath dry slightly before you start adding on top, because it might just overly blend together. You can always use a hairdryer on a medium heat if you want to speed up the drying process. So I'm not overthinking these shapes slightly, but I'm just keeping the edges of them quite curved, just because I want to keep with that nice fluid shape. And the fun thing about this process is we're going to be doing the same thing with all of our colours. There's no right or wrong where you place them, and there's no right or wrong with the shapes that you're making. You can kind of just get lost in your painting at this point. We are keeping it very abstract and loose. You definitely don't need to follow along with what I'm doing. You can just decide what you want to do for your own painting. If you want to add a few different layers of paint, feel free to do so as well. When you're happy, I recommend washing off your brush before you pick up your next shade. I'm also going to go ahead and lightly dry this with the hairdryer just to speed up the drying process. So picking up my next colour, I'm going for this orange shade. I'm now going to do exactly the same thing again. So we just want to be mindful that we're not covering up all of the yellow and again all of the pink. And we're just going to start creating a few other shapes using our next tone. And we're going to do this across all three of our fruit shapes. When you're happy with that colour, just give your brush another wash in the water. I'm going to give my painting a quick dry with the hairdryer again as well. Next up, I'm picking up this red coral colour, just adding in some of that water from my brush just to revive the paint slightly, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing with the red, just overlapping some of these colours, and just be mindful not to overlap some of your first colours. You might start to be losing some of the pink if you've gone for pink as your first layer, or some of the yellow. You can always add those shades back in if you feel like you have lost them. We're just going to enjoy this process, just adding in this layer of paint to all of our fruit. This is where you can take a step back and change up anything that you like. So I might just pick up one of my other brushes, and I'm just going to add a little bit of pink just over here where I feel like the shape has gone a little bit lopsided. So I'm just adding a slightly bigger curve around here with the pink. Next up, you can just give the brushes that you've used a good wash, and if you want to, you can change up your water. I'm now going to go ahead and mix up the colours that I'm going to use for the stalks and the leaves. So I'm just picking up some white, and I'm going to add some of this green into the white. Now this is where you can really experiment with your green shades. Remember, if you've mixed up a colour that you don't like, you can always just spend a moment experimenting with the different shades that you're creating. And if you haven't got green paint available in your kit, then you can just mix up your own shade of green using blue and yellow paint. So I'm just changing up this colour slightly by adding in a little bit of blue, giving it a good mix. I like to just add the new shades nice and gradually. You can then decide if you're happy with the colour or if you want to add anything else to it. I'm also picking up a tiny bit of my coral shade and adding it in, and this just gives it a slightly more earthy undertone. It just mutes the pink slightly. So if you feel like you've gone too bright and you don't want to be as bright, adding a little bit of red into your mixture just brings in a slightly more earthy undertone. I'm just adding some yellow paint back onto my palette, and now I'm going to keep the paint I've already got on my brush. I've got that green, but I'm just going to mix up some blue and some yellow together, mixing it in with the green that I've already got on my brush. And this should give us quite a lovely deeper shade of green. If you've got too much blue in there and it's a little bit too turquoise, just add a tiny bit more yellow into the paint. Then just adding a little bit of white, a little bit more yellow to brighten it up. Just experiment with your colours. Just make sure, as long as you're happy with the shades that you've got. And I'm just making sure I've got a lighter version and a darker version, just so that they stand out when they're next to each other on the painting. If you don't want to use green shades for your leaves and for your stalks, you can always go a little bit more abstract and do them in bright blue. You could do them in red. You could mix up a purple using blue and red. You can experiment with your colours if you want to. Now I'm going to pop this brush down and pick up a different shaped brush. So I've got one here which has got a slanted edge, and I'm going to use this just to paint in the stalks and the leaves. So I've added a little bit of water to it. I'm just starting from one of the oranges, and I'm just doing a swoopy line going from the top of the orange all the way up to the top of the canvas. You can then do this with the next orange, and as you can see, I've just overlapped the top just so it looks like it's coming out of the top of the orange, just joining it up together, and then doing the same with the third one. You don't want these lines to be symmetrical, you want them to kind of go off and have a wobble. And then going to do a few other little stalks or branches. This is where some of our leaves are going to sit. Again, it's quite nice if the leaves overlap the fruit slightly, so I'm just placing them where I know where I want the leaves to go. You can always add more afterwards if you want to. And then going to start sketching in the leaf shapes. And then I'm going to fill one half in with this colour, and I've left the other half empty. I'm going to go back in with a different shade. Just overlapping this fruit with another leaf so the leaf looks like it's in front of the orange. When you're happy with that, you can give your paintbrush a wash in the water. I'm going to pick up my other shade of green now, just using the same brush. I'm just going back into that first leaf that I drew, and I'm just going to do the other side of it with this different colour so it almost looks like it's two-toned. These are quite fluid shapes, they tend to point slightly at the end, curve out and then curve back in again to meet the stalk. Remember, you can always do a couple of coats of paint with this. You might just want to leave it for a bit, and you can always go back and add in another coat once it's dried slightly. Just going to draw in another leaf here, again just overlapping the fruit. Want it to look nice and full. The leaves are sort of like an elongated lemon shape. Now moving over to a tiny little brush, picking up some more of that green colour, and then going into one of my leaves, and I'm just going to do a line down the middle. So this is where we can have fun just by adding in all of the final details and touches to our painting. Just going ahead and using some of this darker shade and adding a little sort of semicircle just around where the stalk meets the fruit. You can also do this on the base of the fruit as well, just where you would see that little mark. So using my slanted brush again, I'm just going to mix up another shade. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of blue, and I'm just mixing it in with that green shade that I've already got on my brush, just to give me a slightly more turquoise shade. I'm going to go ahead and just add this colour to the other side of my main leaf, just to introduce a different shade into the painting. Then just going to add another small leaf sort of poking out from the top and wrapping around the top part of the canvas. I'm just picking up my smaller brush and some of this blue shade, and I'm just adding tiny little shadows just around some of the areas where the stalks meet the fruit. If you're using a little brush, you can give it a wash now, and this is where we can have some fun with adding some extra shapes, details, doodles to our painting. So I'm just mixing myself up a little bit more of my light pink using the white paint and some of my primary magenta. And then I'm going to switch back to my clean small brush just to add in some of this pink detail. So picking up some of this paint, I'm just going to start by adding a stripe in between that leaf, just to add a pop of colour in the middle. I want to be quite thick with this, so I'm just adding little swipes of paint, picking up some more until I reach the end. And this is your choice now. You can just add extra detail and doodles wherever you want. I'm just going to add some more of this pink onto the blue leaf that I've got at the top of the canvas. Just doing a line down the middle. Just going to add a little bit of water into my coral shade just to revive it slightly, giving it a really, really good mix. Then just using that coral shade to draw a line in between the main bigger leaf. Again, this is up to you. You can use any colours, shades that you wish. If you're happy with how your painting's looking, you can stop here. You don't have to keep going. But I do love adding these final details in. I think they really make the painting pop. So I'm just picking up some of the light pink and I'm just going to add a line going down next to that coral colour. And while I've got this pink on the brush, I'm going to do the same on the other leaf. I'm going to do a line on either side of that darker green line in the middle, just for extra detail. And I'm only pushing down really lightly using the very tip of my paintbrush. Now taking the other end of my brush, I'm just dipping it in pure white paint and I'm just adding dots to areas of the fruit. Now this is up to you where you want to add them, how many. Doing them sort of in lines, in clusters. Almost thinking about where the light might be hitting the fruit. So adding almost like that shine that you might get. And you can either do this with the other end of your brush like I'm doing here, or if you want to, you can just flip the brush around and use the bristled end. I'm doing this on all three of the fruit. Switching the brush back over, I'm just going to use the bristled end and some white paint. I'm just going to add some extra detail to some of the leaves. Just doing little curved flicks on this leaf here. This is really up to you now what you do, what you want to add, the shapes, the colours. I love how the dots are looking, so I'm just adding some tiny little dots along the edges of the stalks, just with white paint, and I'm using the bristled end of my brush now. I do think that these dots and these stripes really help make the painting pop, so it's completely up to you how many you want to add. I've also just realised I've got a little bit of a smudge on the bottom right, so I'm just covering that up and I'm just going to dab it down slightly just so it covers it. This is up to you. This is where you can take a little stand back, decide if there's anything else you want to add to your painting. But if you're happy, we have come to the end of our abstract fruit masterpiece. I hope that you all enjoyed that. If you like this video, then please do give us a little thumbs up and a comment in the box below. And if you want to subscribe to our channel, we bring you new art tutorials all the time so you can get creative from the comfort of your own home. We're also Brush and Bubbles on both Instagram and TikTok if you want to say hi there. We love seeing your creations, so please do tag us in anything or send us photos. Thanks everyone. Bye.